board. It's a meeting held in public, which is different to a public meeting. There will be an opportunity, if we have any, to take questions from the public, which probably in these circumstances will have been submitted or maybe submitted to the meeting, but they absolutely need to relate to the contents of the agenda. Okay, apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Kelvin, and we may have some others who.
We haven't got Sarah with us, have we, Kate?
Professor.
No, not that Sarah. Sarah Dolling, who's a anaesthetics trainee.
Keeping an eye out for her at the beginning.
Sitting outside, is she?
No.
Oh, okay, well, she may join us at some point. Any declarations of interest in addition to the ones that are in front of us? No, great. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, normal routine, page turn, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 7, page 8, page 9. Nope. We sign those as a record of our previous meeting? Yep. Action chart.
So all the actions are either closed or not due until next month, Chair. So unless there's any questions on the updates, detail.
Okay, thank you. Are there any matters arising from the previous meeting? No. So a little bit, just a couple of updates from me. We will be looking at the winter plan today. There will be some background detail to that, which we'll pick up in the private board. So just so everybody's aware of that, because it will come up in the integrated performance report, but there's some information which is currently being formed, which we need to share with you in the private board. My visits since we last met, I went to Weston. I've never seen so much paper. Crates and crates and crates of paper files, crates of them, all being moved, plastic boxes, all being moved around all over the place. It's like going back 20 years. And interesting, yet another example of the IT difficulties our staff face when they work for us, but they're based in a building that belongs to somebody else. I mean, absolutely writ large at Weston, but particularly in neurology. Yeah. You know, they're really struggling to manage. They're trying to access patient records often on the UHBW system. So it was an eye opener. Went to the renal unit, which is spectacularly good. I mean, it's really something to be proud of. And a wonderful attitude. Talked to quite a lot of patients there, hugely appreciative of, you know, just how great the service is, how they kept going and looked after them through COVID. So it's worth a visit if anybody feels like driving to Weston. So that was worth doing. Yesterday I went up to 26A cardiology, quite deliberately to do the board round, the whiteboard round, and just see, you know, what of all the patients in there, who did they think they could get home, and what was needed to get those patients home. And then I went back at 2 o'clock to see how they'd done against getting those patients home. They'd done pretty well, actually. They really had managed to get people into the discharge lounge, ready to be discharged. There are a couple of quite interesting insights. Their healthcare, they're short of healthcare assistants. They had 2 of the 4 they're meant to have. And the healthcare assistants are cleaning the rooms or cleaning the bays in between patients. And apparently this is what they always do. And they clean the toilets and all the rest of it. And I just wonder, is that a really good use of our HCAs? Is there not another way we could be doing that?
I'm happy to take that away. That shouldn't be the SOP.
Well, apparently they tell me that is what they always do, and that's common on all our wards. So at a time when we're desperately short of HCAs, question, is there another way to do this? I don't have a view, I'm just wondering. The other thing that was absolutely fascinating was the delays and difficulties placed on us by what's going on in our sister organisation down the road. So we have a patient in there who is waiting for an MDT review at UHVW, and they only have the MDT review once a fortnight. So he will be a patient with us for a fortnight until somebody decides what his treatment needs to be. And that seems to me to be a bit wonky. And there were a number of examples of a kind of breakdown in the handover between us and them, the way they work and what we need to happen. And it spoke volumes to me about why in the acute provider collaborative, the clinical strategy is really important, and we need to iron out some of these things and, you know, fulfill our ambition of a seamless experience across the city. So that was interesting. And then the last thing, which won't surprise anybody in the board, really high levels of stress and anxiety amongst staff. So I talked to a lot of the staff, and they, you know, described getting up in the morning to come to work and a sense of dread about what the day was going to hold and what the winter's going to be like. And I think this board's certainly well aware that that's how the staff are feeling. So it was good to be able to talk to them about that. And actually, I've had a note from them this morning saying it was great to be heard. So, you know, that means we need to do more of that. We can't solve it. We don't have a magic wand, which is what I said to them yesterday. But the act of listening can be quite powerful. So that was really productive. And then yesterday, Maria and I launched Black History Month, which was a great event, wasn't it? It was really good. There's a list of activities going on. So I would really suggest that if you're in the hospital, you go to one of them. There are drop-ins, there's a Schwartz round, there's music, there's food in the canteen. I would really suggest that if you're here for whatever reason, you go, particularly the non-exec, go and show your face. I made the point yesterday, and we will talk about res and des data today. I made the point yesterday, whilst it's really fantastic to celebrate Black History Month, really this is a celebration and a conversation we need to be having 365 days of the year, not just for 28. And we need to focus, you know, continuing the work we do as a board to actually do something to make ourselves an organisation in the true sense of the word. Are there any questions about any of that? Maria, Chief Exec's report.
Okay. So actually the report you have in front of you, a lot can change in a week. When we talk about some of our performance improvements, obviously we've had quite labile performance over the last few days, again, often in relation to diverts from other hospitals, etc. So our performance has been a little bit up and down. We'll hear much more about that later on, but we continue to be very happily on target, our 104, where we have no waiters, 78 weeks with our trajectory to zero by March 23, and some positive improvements in cancer. So actually some notable successes, but we obviously need to sustain those along with ambulance handovers. COVID, whilst reported in the written report about reducing, has actually again, and we currently have now 82 patients in hospital, 3 in ICU, although generally COVID incidental. They have COVID, but that is not the main reason that they are with us. Since our last meeting, obviously we have had the death of the Queen. Just wanted to confirm with the board that we followed all national protocols. We did observe the bank holiday on the 19th of September and had taken some risk assessed judgments around what would go on that day, and I think minimise the impact to our patients, but there has been some impact. So again, in terms of elective backlog, we have a little bit more to do than we were perhaps expecting to, and that will be reflected in some of our figures. We have rolled out our electronic patient record, and some of the teething problems continue, although they are going down week by week. We think there's probably another 3 to 4 weeks of working through these to fully resolve most of those issues, notwithstanding some of the concerns around outposts and where some of our staff work in different ways. There are still some issues there. COVID and flu vaccination programme running very well down in our atrium. I don't know if we've got a latest update on figures as of today. It was 1,600 last week. I'm not sure where we are this week.
At just over 2,000.
2,000, okay, which is a good proportion, and staff are very willing to go and be vaccinated and keep themselves and their families safe. We had a celebration of our internationally educated nursing staff, which was a lovely event. We've also had some nice success in being finalists in 2 very prestigious categories, the National Innovate Awards and the Excellence in Orthopaedic Awards. Along with Michelle, as Michelle said, the launch of Black History Month. And I think whilst we celebrate throughout October the history, culture and achievements of our BAME colleagues, it did, of course, bring us to think again about our representation in leadership, the disproportionately negative outcomes in maternity, in a number of services, actually, mental health in particular, and then, of course, how we continue to support and bolster the 20% of our staff who are reflective of our local population. So I think that's a piece of work. We were able to say that we are fully committed. I think we talked about accountability, didn't we, Michelle?
We were asked the question about accountability.
Yeah, how we as a board are accountable for addressing this situation. And we talked about values-based recruitment, some of those blocks to allowing people to become leaders where clearly they have the potential, but sometimes our processes are reflective of historical anomalies which don't necessarily meet the needs of what we should be doing today. And again, as with Michelle, would urge people to get along if they can. We're in the middle of the National Staff Survey season. Nationally, there are big issues out there for NHS staff at the moment. The burnout, moral injury, the distress, the stress that we are hearing about all the time, high vacancies and turnovers in pretty much all organisations, and that coupled with cost of living, a pay award that many consider derisory, pension concerns, etc. So there are lots of things out there which we, of course, will expect to have an impact in the staff survey this year, but we continue to put in lots of support. Jackie keeps bringing back to the exec new ways of well-being, how we support our staff, and that is an ongoing process. So I think I will leave it there.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Maria? No. Thank you. Patient and staff story. Welcome, Gifty. How are you? Good. Nice to see you. Steve and Tim, I gather, or is it a double act or is it a single act?
It's going to be a single act.
A single act? Is that all right? Is that
Yeah, that's allowed.
Thank you, everybody. We are keen to invite divisions to bring examples of both good and bad patient stories. This today is an example of a patient, Barry, who's presented to us by ASCR division, who's undergone some considerable treatment in our trust. I hope that you'll find Barry's story to be positive, but one of the reasons for bringing it to you is to assure you that despite often positive patient experience, we've to improve. And perhaps afterwards, I could explain to you how perhaps we could have done even better in Barry's case.
Thank you. So this story actually depicts or reflects our trust values and visions. So the second slide talks about what we as MBT represent. And it's a representation of that and how we support patients who come in to deliver exceptional care personally, supporting our teams as well to enable them to do their best as much as possible, providing that exceptional care. And Barry's story indicates that he was very pleased with what he received and the care he received during surgery. And his wife in the video we would see was very impressed. I'm sorry for the editing. It's supposed to be MBT and value, so sorry about that. The next slide, please. So this looks at the whole division of ASCR, saying that it's the biggest division we've got. And even though Barry's story is very positive, we don't always receive positive stories. So it's quite balanced, showing that we get from our FFT, looking at January to June, we had 93.6 positive stories. And also we've got about 3% negative, which we're working on. And you can see the respondents, how many we received, 8,000. And also some of the comments we received was over nearly 6,000. So in a nutshell, we receive a lot of comments that reflect the service we are providing. And there are negative ones that we work on, but Barry's story is a particularly positive one. So if you can just press on the video, that would be great. Thank you.
Got the right link, Steve?
I think it's the next slide, please.
It is the right. Yeah. Right.
This presentation might be slightly different than the one you've got on the board, perhaps.
Third slide. And
Yeah, no, bear with me. I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right.
I can talk through the fifth slide to reflect some of the comments. So if you look at the fifth slide, it shows a comment. One of the patients said that all the staff explained everything to me and tried to relax me before surgery, and nothing was a too much bother. No waiting around in and out. That was gate 24. Another person commented at a fabulous hospital. The nurses were very good and explained what would be happening. I'm deaf. I lip read. The nurses took off their mask and put on visors. Such a lovely act to do. I didn't ask them to do that. My husband and I were thoroughly pleased with the service care we received. So that's another example. And when you look at the sixth slide, whilst we find the video, it also says that thank you. My experience
a few minor lesions on my.
Stop there.
Okay.
Well, it started probably a couple of years ago. I had some, how can I explain it, rough skin on my face, and it was diagnosed as actinokeratosis, which was treated with creams and which worked very well, and that all went. I also had a few minor lesions on my back, which that was several months ago, I suppose, perhaps longer, and they were treated with creams, and that all seems to have worked very well. And then back in October 21, 14th, mid-October, I went to the doctor with a lesion that was developing on my right cheek. And I saw an assistant practitioner who had a look and first of all gave me a course of antibiotics, which of course didn't do anything. And then the lesion gradually got a little bigger, and eventually I went to see a doctor at my local health centre who had roughly diagnosed it and put me on the list to have surgical treatment here at Southmead. And that all came to a point when I had the surgical operation, on the 11th of February. So on the 11th of February, I had the surgical procedure, which was carried out by the plastic surgeon, Matthew Fell. he expressed a degree of concern as to the size of the lesion and said that much care would need to be taken because of he didn't want to damage any of the nerve tissue. He started in the operation by taking 2 smaller lesions off of the left side, left cheek, which was fine. And then he set about working on the large lesion on my right cheek. The procedure had gone quite a way, and he was a little bit concerned, and he contacted his superior, that's Iraklis Delacan-Castelou, was there within a little more than 20 minutes, and he started a little bit of work on the lesion himself, and he was explaining to Matthew Fell what he was doing and the care he was taking, and it was quite interesting for me to listen to the conversation between them, quite honestly. And then they took a skin graft from under my right arm, and the operation was then more or less complete. I must say I was extraordinarily impressed with the team that was working with Matthew Fell, and Matthew himself, who took every care to make sure that I was comfortable. For example, the first 5 or 6 injections that I had in the face, they are extremely painful, but one has to accept that. I was impressed, highly impressed with the fact that Iraklis, the senior consultant, came in. I have a job to get over that, because his care and attention for his work and also his team. I mean, it's very clear from the way that the members of the team who were in the operating theatre with me, listening to their conversation, they highly revere the Iraklis Delacan-Castelou as a person, as somebody of real skill, and the time and effort he takes to pass on his knowledge. It's interesting, the reactions of family and friends. For example, my wife, she wanted to look several times a day at the lesion when it was uncovered, and she thought it was quite miraculous. She couldn't get over how wonderful it looked, considering what the lesion looked like before it was removed.
Thank you. So that's a story of exceptional care, and our teams are working harder and harder. So if you look at the 5th slide from where we stopped, it shows the positive experience. We also have times where people think that we are asking for too much. So the last comment say, how about you let people recover and stop asking for feedback a zillion times? It looks like it's a negative comment, but you can look at it positively. It shows that we are actively working, looking for feedback to work on as well. So the next stage for the final slide is just to make sure that we are working closely. We are looking at, if you look at the 7th slide, it talks about the top themes, top 10 themes, actually 8, and then the top words. So most of the time our staff are featured in the positive responses in the same way you find staff also in the negative comments. What we are doing now is to make sure that we are working with the patient experience team, sharing good practice, drilling a bit deeper into divisions and services to make sure that we're working on some of the negative comments as well and improving practice as a result of that. So thank you very much.
Tim?
Thank you.
So thanks, Gifty. Thanks, Steve. This is obviously a very positive story. The patient's very pleased with the result, and they've had a very good result from cancer surgery in this case. So a number of things I think here that are useful to explore. So what's really important for me for patient experience is that, yes, we harness the positive experiences of patients, but clearly this is a patient who's willing to talk to us and is willing to share. And he offers a rich vein of information here. So, for example, there's something about the waiting time between his diagnosis and his operation. And potentially, there's something that suggests we may have altered our approach depending on the size of the lesion, and we may have planned differently in terms of the seniority of the surgeon who was present during that procedure. So I would suggest that, yes, we harness positive experience, but there are patients, and there are not that many who are willing to come and talk to us and engage with us with so much time, but we harness their information to look for improvement opportunities. So I think it's important, and in fact, I have already fed that back to our skin cancer team, who do want to do a little bit more in-depth understanding of that patient pathway. It's fair to say we did not meet a cancer standard in this patient. We did drop behind by several days in order to treat him according to the standard. And as many of us in the room realise, that is a real issue both for this trust regionally and nationally in terms of skin cancer treatments. So good news story, a very good result for the patient, and delighted to hear his positive experiences, but a rich vein of information for further quality improvement.
Thank you. Questions? Steve?
Thank you, Michelle. What I guess is interesting about the story, and having looked at Barry's kind of operational story, was the time, as Tim said, we didn't quite meet the 2-week wait cancer standard. But it's clear that when patients cross different organisations and specialties, there's increasing complexity for patients. So if they're having oncology treatment at UHBW and other treatment here, the multitude of people that come to get involved in patients is quite significant. And we have a good approach about how we work with colleagues, but I think it's incredibly important about how we engage with patients to help them understand that their pathways are complex. It is clear that, for me, that clearly patient experience is very multifactorial. It comes in many numbers of layers. If I think about my own experience, what Barry described was how I feel, how the teams have made me feel, and how they give me confidence that when they're chopping this thing out the side of my face, it's going to be okay. But actually, of course, we know that cancer standards are important, and other aspects of patient's experience are important. But it's not the obvious thing that springs to mind when they're with us. It's a bit like when you choose to go on an aircraft. You make the assumption that it's safe. But actually how you're made to feel by the pilot, cabin crew, is all about the experience. It's a bit the same here. So our patients expect key aspects of their care to be safe and to be done timely. But for Barry, and I know for many other patients, it's about how we make them feel. But actually it's our job to do to make people feel safe and put them through timely pathways to ensure they get the best outcomes.
Any other question? Just one sort of thought, which we don't get to, is he must have been seen in outpatients to start off with, wasn't he? And I'm wondering about the assessment there about how complex this surgery was going to be. So I've got a question in my head as to what would have happened if we hadn't had a senior consultant able to come in 20 minutes. And that we should have caught that ball before we ever got into the theatre. So, I mean, I think you're right, Tim. It's a great story and it's brilliant to see someone who's so happy with what we did. But I do think there is learning in it.
There's a lot of learning, and I agree. And I think that one of the dangers here is that we celebrate the patient successes and the happiness, and we move on. But as I said here, Barry is very happy to engage with us further, and perhaps it's an opportunity for us to understand if there were things we could have done better.
I think that's really useful. Oh, it's true always, isn't it, that you never get anything in life 100% right. And in celebrating occasions when we get it nearly right, there's always that little bit where you can learn something that helps you the next time round. So I think, if he's prepared to work with us, which is great, let's try and understand the other parts of that. Because there's a question too about what went on in primary care. and about creams and diagnosis, isn't there? Which is outside of our, our area. But even so, if you look at the patient pathway in its entirety, there's a question about that. Sarah?
I was going to raise a similar point if we had time, which was to say helpful would be to have some of these journeys across the system
Yes. Yes.
and engage with colleagues outside for aggregate benefit and education.
Yeah, because it's about growing the learning, isn't it, outside the walls of the hospital, really. Great. Thank you, everyone. Maria, sorry.
I was just going to ask Gifty perhaps or Steve, when we look at our themes and our words, because there's not much granularity under staff or attitude, and given that it's a positive and a negative, how would we go about pulling out what it is we need to do to address both of these things, to celebrate the great staff, whatever that might mean, but then negative, because staff is a recurring theme, if it is around attitude, if it is around customer facing, patient facing behaviour, willingness generally, how would we then go about pulling together programs of work, which means we don't see the same set of negatives in a year's time?
I think what we currently do, we've got a patient engagement lead who works with the divisional patient experience leads, and we dig in deeper to find out some of the comments. Sometimes people are able to give us comments, which is the rich qualitative data we've got. So we then work with the ward managers, with the matrons to say that this is what somebody has said. For instance, there's a story we're working on and somebody mentioned a negative comment about our shower. So I'm currently working with the ward manager to make sure that the shower and all the negative comments is addressed. So we are working on that. So we're able to look at that. And if it's good points on staff as well, we share with them in team meetings, and then the staff are able to get a bit more motivated that what we were doing is making an impact to our patients. So celebrating the successes and also working on some of the feedback of improvement. So we look at that and we liaise directly with the teams.
I may just add, the Friends and Family Test free text comments are a beautiful insight to people's experience beyond the number. I think the area where we have to do better is taking those comments and doing as Gifty as described. And my sense is we're not doing it in the most productive way that we could do. So I think we've got the insight. It's already there. We need to do something with it. That will be for our next phase of our patient experience improvement and our patient first work, of course. We've done great work on groups with learning disability and autism and the like, but actually we're now looking at generalised patient experience, particularly ward and outpatients, where we get the biggest bulk of our patients coming through. So that's the next steps. And that's actually coming through patient first work.
Can I just ask about how this gets fed back to the shop floor, the actual teams who are involved in these processes? Are individual cases sort of done by across the whole group of fantastics, the team, and they review the action of the patients and the journey so that they learn the lessons as we talked about? Or how is that fed back to those individual groups? And how do you then bring in the multidisciplinary aspects, both nursing and care and staff?
So if I may, I think you've articulated my point better than I did, is that we tend to only do that when things go wrong. So where there is a problem, so let's say that a cancer has been inoperable, then there'll be a review to understand how much of that we could have influenced. But things go wrong, fortunately, very rarely. But there are not that many of those cases to consider. Fortunately, the majority of cases go well in the patient's eyes. And those are the cases where we need to learn. So we can't just tick off a patient. Whilst it's great a patient is happy, we mustn't assume that everything was perfect. So this is a case where, yes, the patient's happy, but was care perfect? No. What could we have done better? So currently it doesn't exist. So it's only when things go wrong do we start to unpick the journey. And I would argue that there are cases where things have gone well, where we should unpick the journey and improve. It's part of the constant quality improvement.
No, that'd be interesting, because I mean, it's the lucky escapes that we avoid, whether we avoid the failure, which is probably where we can learn a lot of lessons. And I just wasn't clear about how we did feed back into the, be handy to understand how that has developed over each period. Okay.
So Richard kindly pointed me to a webinar which NHS providers did, and it features the team in Northumbria, and they've been on their improvement journey now for nearly 5 years. I mean, I visited them probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they were pretty impressive there. I will circulate it. It's a really interesting watch, but it shows you what it looks like if you're best in class, in terms of the way you do patient experience. It's really quite phenomenal. So I will just circulate that to everybody, you know, as an idea of what we might aspire to. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Giffy, very much. Thank you. Welcome, Rona. Jackie, Rez and Bez.
Thank you, everybody. This is our annual report to the board for the Workforce Race Equality Standard and the Workforce Disability Equality Standard and the Gender Pay Gap report. Rona is acting as the Deputy Chief People Officer now. Huge amount of data as ever in this report. And Rona, if you'd just like to pull out 2 or 3 salient points, and then we'll take it over for questions.
Perfect. Okay, so as you all know, this data is an annual submission to NHS England, but also something that we publish on our public website, and should be showing progress that we're making in addressing and tackling inequalities within our workforce. The data itself is drawn from a range of sources. So some of it comes from our staff survey, some of it comes from our electronic staff record, our recruitment database, and our employee records tracker. And the appendices provided, so Appendix 2 is on the Race Equality Standard, and Appendix 3 is on the Disability Equality Standard. But if I was going to pull out some key points from those data sets, I think in summary, there's no significant change to our data when compared with last year. We are making some progress, although it is slow, which I think you would expect because these are it's a challenging agenda, and we've always said that we're committed to a long-term strategy of change in addressing the inequality that exists within our workforce for staff from protected groups. So if we look into the Race Equality Standard in more detail, just under 20% of our workforce are from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic background. However, that is disproportionately reflected in our lower bands, in our more junior staff groups, so bands 2 to 5. We don't have any staff represented at senior levels, although we have made progress in the last year across the middle management roles around 8A, 8B and 8C. We've seen some improvements in the relative likelihood of staff from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background in being appointed from shortlisting, but it's still not above the national average, so it's still an area that we are concentrating on in our priorities. And we know our staff tell us, and they tell us repeatedly in staff survey results, that they do not believe there's an equal opportunity in career progression and access to development opportunities when compared to white colleagues. And staff from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic background are twice as likely to report discrimination in the workplace from their manager. I'll come on to what we're doing about it, but if we just move on to disability equality next. So 2.4% of our workforce self-identify as being disabled. It's an increase on the number of staff that reported last year, but clearly an area that we need to continue to promote and remove stigma in reporting around. Key points, I think, in terms of our disability equality data is that the relative likelihood of staff identifying as disabled entering into formal capability process is much higher when compared to non-disabled staff. It's improved, so it's reduced by 2 points over last year, but it continues to be 5.08, so significantly higher. And combined with that, in our staff survey results, we're seeing disabled staff reporting that they feel under increased pressure, more pressure than their white colleagues, than their non-disabled colleagues, in having to attend work when they don't feel able to. I think those are the really salient points that you need to take from the data. What it tells us, and returning to my first point, which is it's not a dramatically different landscape from the one we looked at last year, is that the priorities we have around equality, diversity, inclusion are the right ones. So as a trust, we have 3 priorities. Those are to achieve fairer recruitment, to develop the talent of staff from protected groups, and to support the development of staff networks. So in terms of fairer recruitment, we want to remove the barriers to entry for staff who are reporting a perception and also proven in the data that there are barriers to entry, whether that be in shortlisting or appointment to post. A lot of that work has to be targeted at our line management population within our workforce. So that includes setting objectives around the ED&I agenda for all senior leaders and ensuring that all of our interviews are reflective of our trust commitment to achieving an inclusive workplace. We've got a number of positive action programmes that we are working with the system on, and we will have a number of senior roles in the pipeline where we want to use a positive action approach to ensuring that we ring-fence those development opportunities for staff from a protected group. In terms of talent development, again, I think the focus needs to be on the work has to be done by those in the majority. So our senior leaders have, our senior leadership team in the trust has participated in inclusive training facilitated by an external provider, Blue Tulip. And we've also completed, 6 of our executives have completed a first cohort of reciprocal mentoring with staff from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. We're currently evaluating that with a plan to roll out a second cohort either late this year or early in the new year. And we've had 11 participants in the Believe programme, which is something that we run in collaboration with the system and currently targeted at staff from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups with a view to supporting them in developing their own career pathways. Around the staff networks, we've put in place protected time for the chairs and secretaries of the staff network groups. And those networks are not just for Black, Asian, minority ethnic group or for disabled and neurodiverse staff groups, but we also have a LGBTQ+ staff network. And we're looking at other opportunities where we're hearing the need from staff that they would like to have a network to acknowledge perhaps the inequalities or difficulties they face. So we've also given them protected time. We've put in dedicated admin support through expanding our own internal ED&I team. And we've also provided upskilling and training to those staff who are taking on those leadership responsibilities around staff networks to ensure that they know how to run them, because they can be quite difficult things to manage with a really diverse group of people with a whole range of views and different needs. More generally, we've re-established the ED&I committee at trust level, and Kelvin Blake, as our non-executive, is the chair of that group. And that group has revised and agreed the new ED&I policy statement and vision for the trust, which should be launched later this year. We continue to work really closely with the ICB. So Munira Chowdhury, who's our head of ED&I, leads many of the work streams across the priorities at a system level. And she also ensures that ED&I is embedded into other initiatives that we are doing across the trust so that it doesn't become a silo or a side activity. So ED&I lens is trying to be instilled throughout, whether that be things like freedom to speak up, cultural ambassadors, restorative just culture, and even the launch of our new values later this year will ensure that we've really given it that test, that acid test, that it works for staff from minority groups. It isn't just the 2 data sets that we report on that we're interested in. We're also interested in issues such as the menopause. So our ED&I committee has agreed a range of initiatives to support women in the workplace around the menopause, but also to recognise the intersectionality of disadvantage and the cross-cutting themes between all of these groups and staff networks. So I think in summary, we're on the right track. Although that's quite a bold statement to make, we clearly have a lot of work to do, but I think our priorities are right, and we continue to see progress, although slow. It should give us the assurance that we're doing the right things.
Thanks, Rona. That's great. There's so much data. It's a very complex area, and that's a really helpful summary.
Questions?
Can I ask about national college, people who come in, it must be quite dislocating for many of them, perhaps even more challenged. Is the perception of how they're treated? Are they accepted properly? And how do they find not just work, but the community at large? How do they get accepted in the overall environment? Because if we want to continue to attract, particularly from the same places, we really need to be focused on that.
Yeah, and it's a really good insight. And the answer is we're doing a huge amount around the pastoral, providing accommodation for the first 3 months, supporting with accommodation and actually, getting sort of involved in the community. And we've got a really good reputation and a really good, we don't lose people through that. But what we do, and, Rona's data really underpins is that we've got a hugely ambitious workforce from our international nurses in particular, and we see them making steady progress to about band 6 and 7, and then they're sort of facing this bit of an invisible wall. So a lot of the work that we're doing is actually these internal development programs, and Steve, as our Chief Nursing Officer, has already began to identify some development roles where we can actually give people the opportunity. So we've got the first 2 of those coming into play very quickly.
Sarah. Thank you, thank you for the report. I mean, it's really good to hear you mention exceptionality. I think the other issue is that I think using the term Black, Asian and minority ethnic isn't helpful, is it? Because you have many colleagues from very diverse backgrounds, and I was wondering how we understand better what the groups are under that umbrella and how their career progression is, how their experience is of working here, and whether that will help us unlock more about what we can do in terms of targeted interventions. For example, I'm imagining the profile of the consultant work.
Exactly.
It's going to be very different.
Yes.
The other areas of the trust you just mentioned. Yes.
I think it's a really key point. We know that it's impossible to, I think, get the right terminology, and there will always be a difference of opinion about the right way of referring to this clear inequality within the workplace. I don't think we have a perfect answer to this. It's definitely a work in progress. When we look at our Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff network, there is a real diverse range of people from across all roles and all backgrounds, and I think that has been a real learning curve for the network in terms of how it kind of brings people together in a collective space who actually have very different experiences within the workplace. The medical team are looking at how they do more, I guess, targeted work with female medics, but also female medics from a minoritized population, because the experience, like you say, is very different. But at the moment, I think there's a kind of, they're working together on it. I think the staff network acknowledge it as an issue. I don't think we've got a clear plan of action around.
Well, and I think that whole, homogenization of that group of people is something you're absolutely right. We've got the data that can break down. So you're absolutely right. We know that our clinically qualified staff tend to be of a predominantly Asian background, and we know that our band 2s and band 3s are, people often in cleaning and porter roles are often of Afro-Caribbean roles. So there are definitely different concerns, and different backgrounds, etc., and different blockers for them. And so it's actually understanding the different blockers at the different grades and levels to try and unwrap some of that. But actually, I think the staff networks and giving those people voice, and it sort of triangulates with what you said, Chair, from your visit, is actually, I think the really important thing here is that everybody's now beginning to talk, and people are listening, and people have got a voice. It might be from the food and the canteen, which has radically changed over the last 12 months or so, to creating some of these career pathways.
There must be trusts with more diverse populations than ours who do this really well.
Yeah.
And Maria works in an area of London that was.
Maria, it's lots, and actually to that end, I would say that I think we had discussed previously offering a disproportionate access to leadership development training for our BME staff. And I notice actually that we've backwards in that, and we still have a higher proportion of white staff accessing non-mandatory training in CPD. So I think unless we're putting in, and we do know, back to the point earlier, we have to keep listening, and what we are being told is that our black staff particularly feel that they have to work much harder to get to the same place and stay in the same place, that they feel there's a legitimacy to having qualifications and are very keen to get those and would feel more supported, I think, if we're able to offer a little bit more about that. There is some fantastic work going on, but I think there is a frustration perhaps that we're not moving forward as quickly as we need to. So I think we need to set ourselves targets and be accountable back to our staff. Not seeing a reflection in senior leadership is really, really concerning. And we may have to take more positive action. And I do think taking disproportionate action in a way, particularly around focusing, targeting, training, developing opportunities, making our processes, the qualifications we say we need, don't need, and are actually quite discriminatory in their own right, because many people will never have been able to access these qualifications because of the intersectionality. I think there's a lot more we need to do.
John.
I'm sorry. Sarah made all of the points I was going to make, but I want to make them again because I think they're really important. As is, of course, all of us really welcome this data, this report, and we welcome all the things that the trust is doing and the imagination that's gone into it. It's fantastic. But in the other sectors in which I work, and I appreciate that you're reporting what's demanded by the NHS, actually we've moved on from BAME. We are already analysing individual ethnic groups because, as you pointed out, Jackie, you already have a sense of where there are differences. And that's really crucial to finding a solution. The data needs to be accurate and it needs to be nuanced. And I'm pleased also to hear about the interest in intersectionality because clearly that is important as well. I'm also delighted, Maria, to hear you mention goals or targets. I think when one presents this data, and it's criticism that I have in one other organisation that I work in, it's really important that when it's presented with the benchmark and the goal, not just some arbitrary figures. We have inevitably, because we've had a big focus on BAME, both on this board and within the trust. Actually, the figures that were most stark for me were those for disability, given that 20% of the UK population self-identify as having a disability. Our figures really do look very poor there. Now, they're probably very similar to everyone else in the sector, but we're in a position to do something better. And I just highlight that those, for me, those disability figures look really stark.
Can I respond to that? I agree. We're obviously bound by the NHS reporting structure, who's
understood
the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, and it's a changing theme. We're actually not allowed to refer to it as its acronym anymore within the NHS. But you're absolutely right. The point of all of this is the actual, the data underneath and looking at those groups separately. We're really concerned about disability, and I'm really pleased that you make that point because people aren't declaring it. And obviously, so much of this may not be visible disability. And, we're in a fairly modern campus. And I really worry about have we got all the appropriate workplace adjustments. And it's back to what Rowan has made. When you look at our turnover and our retention, we need to make ourselves attractive as possible. So minimising a whole load of educational qualifications and minimising some of the stuff that we've got a whole load of hidden barriers there. And there's never a more critical point for us than absolutely doing that. Huge amount of work still to be done. And actually, when I look at other sectors like higher education, we've got a hell of a way to go.
I just do one point again. Some of the feedback in Black History Month yesterday, and a report was referred to. But one of the biggest, most aspirational ways to move people into leadership is seeing people who look like you.
Yes.
So the people like us.
Absolutely.
So I think until we're able to have that representation, it's going to be very difficult, and it will look like we say one thing and do another. So I really do think we have responsibility to work on developing leadership. And we do that part of our aims, as we've discussed, the trust objectives about creating community aspiration. It's very much about having that reflected in our staff complement. But I think also, go back to our local population and health outcomes. We collect an awful lot of information from our patients around ethnicity, background, etc. Is that really reflected in the way we deliver services so that these outcomes are being moved forward? So there is both a clinical strategy aspect to this as well as our staff responsibilities.
Thank you. We have to report this.
Yes.
But we should not lull ourselves to a false sense of security because we've complied with the reporting of the data. It's nothing more than a tool. And we should never use this as a way of persuading ourselves we're doing all the right things or not. Because actually there are some figures in here are pretty woeful. I wonder, we may not know the answer to this. I wonder though, Rona and Jackie, how much a lack of confidence is an element in some of our staff feeling able to step forward for opportunities that actually we don't inspire in them necessarily the confidence to believe they can do certain things.
And I think there is an element of that, and creating the career pathway so people can grab it for themselves. I think there's a certain amount of sitting back, waiting to be spotted and waiting to be asked, which actually is a problem. I actually think it's a management issue. It's about actually managers acting and thinking in a very different way. And I think I can't put enough emphasis on that. There's a cultural change here that we're nibbling away at, but the elephant in the room is people actually thinking outside their own box, their own lived experience and acting in a different way.
Well, you will have heard me say this before. We're very good at talking to the 20% and listening to the 20% and trying to encourage the 20%. We're not very good at having the right dialogue with the 80% who are some of the behaviours we really need to change. And we need to think about how we might do that. Glenn?
I just wanted to reinforce, this isn't something that the exec team see as a people team issue. This is something we are all uncomfortable in looking at what's there. And it's something that I talk about with my management team about how are we doing this. I think we've got beyond at each decision point, are we comfortable that people are making a decision that isn't influenced by race or disability at that decision point. But I think we now need to look at our systems and processes that are allowing or filtering out people to stop them getting to that point. So I think we really need to challenge ourselves on how is our recruitment system meaning that fewer people from black and minority ethnic or disabled backgrounds feel comfortable or confident in applying for those things. So how are we stopping people actually getting there to be part of a fair process? And that's where the effort goes in. And I must admit, I've taken part of the reciprocal mentoring thing, and it has been invaluable for me. It has been absolutely fantastic in having that one-to-one relationship where you can talk about very sensitive issues to get other people's perspectives, and it's been invaluable.
Because if you look like us, you can't walk in their shoes.
Exactly.
Steve?
Yeah, there's a very direct correlation between different cultures and people's aspirations and waiting to be asked. I think about nurses from the Philippines, for example, they never progress because actually culturally they don't sell themselves. And in fact, just those words, last week I was told actually from a Sikh culture, you never use the term sell yourself because it seems offensive.
Yes.
So when our Sikh nurses get feedback, sell yourself. Actually culturally, we don't do that. So there's a real importance about how we understand cultures and how we can get the best out of people. I think all of this could become wonderful words, couldn't they, until we actually make some real action. And I guess that the test for us is, what sits directly beneath us. Are we making active opportunities for colleagues from black and minority ethnic communities to have those roles? Because I don't think I see that as well. So we have to really create those opportunities, and I think go out of our way to ensure that black and minority ethnic colleagues get in those roles.
I mean, even the words that are used, you know, like strong and, you know, some of the words in adverts, you look at those and they're massively
Countercultural.
very countercultural. So I think the reduction and minimise the amount of educational qualifications, the way we write our job adverts, the way we recruit is going to be one of the real foundation blocks to start moving these dials.
And just finally, it goes without saying that we as a board and me as the chair are not exempt from this. And you will know that I have been trying really hard to give people the opportunity to come onto the board who probably wouldn't get the opportunity any other way. You know, some success and some difficulty. But I think as a board, I would say, you know, we had two outstanding colleagues and we as a board were very welcoming, and the richness they brought us was really valuable, and we need to keep on with that. So I don't excuse myself from this. I think I've got a role to play to make sure we as a board become more diverse and more representative too.
I mean, we've clearly got a long journey to go on all of this. But I think it's positive we're making progress. One of the things I'm particularly interested in, though, is in the medium to longer term, you know, these communities can provide us a source of absolutely vital staffing and manpower.
Yes. Yeah.
So how are we promoting ourselves within these environments to ensure that we're getting the message across that, yes, there are clearly opportunities. Yes, we are moving forward in terms of our equality and diversity and our opportunities. And yes, you should be really looking strongly at these routes for a career. But how are we getting into the colleges and the university to not specifically but actually there are different, you know, there are different issues that these communities have. And how are we selling ourselves in those communities?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're actually doing huge amounts of work of outreach, both with our system colleagues and with our colleagues at Bristol Council. And we've got a full programme of going into schools and particularly targeting the 5 areas of the community that have sort of, you know, social inequality, social deprivation, and going to schools at 12 and 13-year-olds and starting to talk to them about the breadth of opportunity in health, not just a sort of doctor or nurse binary. And the big piece of work is really getting them in on traineeships, apprenticeships, and making that whole career pathway from HCA to unregistered nurse to sponsoring people to go through university to get to that. You know, it's a medium to long term game, but we're also beginning to start building links, international links, where we've got pipelines. In fact, Tim and Sandra hosted a visit with some colleagues from India, which will not only give us sort of exchanges for clinicians and doctors, but also physiotherapists, and actually bringing more pipeline in at more senior levels as well.
Yeah.
Personally, but
Yes,
Taking people out of their own country where they're needed.
The World Health Organization ethically rules ethical.
Maria, and then I'm going to wrap this up.
Okay, I suppose I would ask, thank you very much for the report, the data. If I look at our priorities for the next year, do we think we're being ambitious enough? Because actually, I think we probably need to fast track. I think we need targets in there about what we say we're going to do. So I suppose, you know, it's a challenge to us as a board, it's a challenge to us as executives. But do we really think, given that we've said progress is slow, that we're putting enough effort into these priorities over the next 12 months? And we go away, reflect, and perhaps come back with some enhanced expectations around these areas?
Well, my challenge would be, are there too many of them? And should we actually say we're going to do 3 things and get them across the line and focus our energy on them? Because currently there are 20 or more.
Yeah, I think that's
so. It's the same old thing. Do everything, and then that's really hard to do, you know.
Yeah.
So yes, I think you're absolutely right. You should go away and work out what we're actually going to do.
And I think rather than reviewing and refreshing, we probably need to, you know, actively target and start putting people through and making those changes around recruitment, which I know we are in train.
Yeah.
Great to be able to say to the board, this is our new change
You
process.
should say
Starts on
you will have
Monday.
every advert neutrally worded by this time next year, for instance. That would be a great goal because, you know, feeding the pipeline at the right level and they'll start to grow and come through.
We do need some measurable.
Yeah.
From
I
this.
think what we need to have are 3 priorities and those waypoints along the way to show that progress is progression and come up with those KPIs to measure that. You know, it's not an excuse, it is a fact that in the pandemic, this work a little bit, you know, it's like a vehicular, we're still ratcheting it up, but it's been really slowly. I think this year, it's safe to say with the recruitment challenge and actually identifying the development posts, those are 2 things that should really start changing these numbers. And we'll put some KPIs in so we can measure that progress.
And we need the staff to prioritise those. They will be able to tell us.
Yeah, we've currently got 25 and there's no way you're going to get through 25 priorities. So the message from the board is loud and clear. Go away, tell us what we're going to do, make it meaningful, tell us how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it by. And then we've got something tangible to aim at. Thank you, Anna, very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Right, moving on into performance. So, Steve, do you want to kind of kick us off with the overall view?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. And you'll see, Chair, as a request from the board, a bit of an indicator that's been in the second page of the responsiveness section, which, as it says, sort of gives a view of where we are at this point in the year and against where we want to be at this point of the year. That's distinct from the actual scorecard, which is against the constitutional standards. And that very much reflects an indication of it, really. Urgent emergency care is still very challenged, but very volatile, as Maria said earlier on. Planned care is on track, not without risk, but those trajectories are on track. There are good plans, I think, in place for diagnostics. They will probably hit in October and November. We expect them to hit in October and November because there are 3 pathways there that we need to get over the line to be able to deliver against that, and I've named those. And the cancer plan is starting to show real progress, although I was reluctant to show it in this until we actually see those numbers coming through, which we are seeing now in September. So that's a general view as to where we're at. But I'd be happy to take questions, Chair, and both on the indicator, if it's helpful, but also on the body of the report.
Okay, thank you. So let's walk through it then. Let's start with responsiveness. Questions? I'm assuming everybody has read it. Tim?
At F&P last week, we discussed the challenges of ambulance handovers and trolley weights, and the irony, the pain that actually, because we have been relatively successful, we seem to be getting more diverts from other places.
Yeah.
So I suspect nothing is resolvable very quickly, but are we now thinking about that, because what we're doing is we put a massive amount of pressure on our wards in order to do this. We're now still getting back to where we were, and we're running out of options. So
yeah,
how are the discussions going in SWAST, and how are we managing some of this?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Tim. So there are a couple of factors, and the report does reflect a really good period, primarily driven by those good clinical decisions that were taken, primarily led by Steve, our chief nurse, in terms of that. And we have seen and patients have seen some real benefit from that, although it has come at a cost of a distributed risk as opposed to in a single place. As usual in urgent emergency care, there are a number of things at play. A second one was that, as Maria said, we moved not having very much COVID in the hospital to having 80 COVID in the hospital. And whilst most of those are incidental, operational impact on flow is significant in the ability to where we can place patients. That has played in as well. But as we have distributed risk from our front door, as it were, we have seen that the requests for us to help others out have increased, I don't have the data on that, but we're hearing it and seeing it every day, and we're starting to detect that now. And that we do have a job to work with our system and provider partners to share with them exactly what we're doing. And Steve has done that not only with them, but around the country in many areas that are interested in what we're doing. So that people can appreciate that whilst we may not have an apparent risk at the front door, we are carrying significant risk across. So that's resulting in us saying no more often, but it is still difficult in the circumstances where there are a dozen ambulances in a neighbouring hospital for us not to be able to help out when we can, but it is sometimes at the cost of our being able to stay ahead of the curve when we do so. So I think we're going to have to be more circumspect in how we say yes and in terms of to those things, whilst at the same time working with system partners and generally working on the underlying issue that's driving most of this, and that is our no criteria to reside volume. But it is a delicate balance, Tim. It is.
Just quickly on divert, Steve.
Yeah.
Are either of the hospital, primarily it's UHBW and Western, I guess.
Yeah.
Are either of them implementing the sort of changes we've implemented, which has given us capacity, or are we taking from two hospitals who haven't done anything about their own problem?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So UHBW have certainly given aspects that we have done try. So they implemented probably about 6 weeks ago, and they had a good performance bounce in terms of ambulance handover delays. Although my sense in the last couple of weeks, just looking at the data now, they have struggled. Their estate is a bit different, although not different in a bad way, I think. They always say, well, you're going to have big side rooms, but the side room aspect for us has been a very small proportion of our overall intervention. So they have certainly done things which has helped their performance. The issue, though, I think, is Western.
Yeah.
And there is limited ability to do very much more than what they already do. And I share my on-call delights as it's the point that when they have a significant number of DTAs and no criteria to reside patients in Western, they clog up very, very easily, very, very quickly.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thanks, Richard.
I know there's action going on, but based on the tables, no criteria to reside is just going up and up. Not flattening out, it's just going through the ceiling.
Yeah, Richard, and we have been careful to insert a change in the data collection then as a result of the EPR, just in case that whatever, but it's not enough to even if there's a marginal change there, and we have no reason to believe it's any different. In fact, there's some view that actually that the collection of the data is more accurate as a result of it in terms of that. So that still is a significant issue for us, and as the chair said, I'll be presenting a view of our planning as we move to winter in the second half of the meeting today, which will show what we can do in terms of mitigation on that. But for the public board, just to reassure that we are working almost on a daily basis with system partners to try and find ways through this. The primary way through it is the key piece of work that is being led by community services, which is discharge to assess. That is probably not going to deliver to the extent that we would like it to deliver, but there are really good conversations happening at the moment about what contingencies could look like in relation to bridging until that plan can deliver. But it does speak for itself.
The second point was on diagnostics. I acknowledge what you say about action being taken, but at the moment, graphs and the trajectories seem to be getting ever further apart. I just wonder whether those trajectories are really realistic.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely right. That is so we've set a fairly, you can see this steep curve that we've tried to change to bring this back into control again. So we've set some fairly ambitious targets for ourselves. It says as much about those as it does about the trajectory of the actual position, if I'm honest, in terms of that. So we probably need to be more measured in that, particularly when some of the schemes that we really need to kick in do kick in. And as I say, there are 3 areas which are volume that we do have a line of sight to them kicking in now in October and November. ECHO, we have been able to get an arrangement with our internal staff to get significantly more work done internally at the weekends. And we have worked with a large provider that has recently finished providing services in Wales, who's come on board with us now. So we just need to check that those providers will deliver what they say they will deliver, and the early indications are good. Endoscopy, there is an expansion of access at Cosham, which has a recruitment lag to it. But actually that division has been able to secure some temporary staff to come on in October, bridging through to permanent staff coming on in November. So that's going well there. And then in endoscopy, again, an external provider has come on board, seems to be doing what they want to do. I'd like a few more weeks to see whether they'll get to the levels they need to in terms of that. But we've also agreed some terms internally, supported by Jackie's team, to allow us to secure more of our own staff to work and sweat our internal assets, particularly at the weekends. They are expected to come on board in October. There's an early indication, I was at a meeting this morning, which suggests that they are starting to come on board, but the impact is unlikely to be until October and November. However, even with those risks, I'm remaining optimistic that we will meet our end of year commitments, which will be that no patient will wait more than 26 weeks and that no more than 25% will wait more than 6 weeks. And that's the national requirement that we're required to meet this year.
Thank you. Sarah and Tim.
Thanks, Steve. So 2 questions. One is for me to understand better your responsiveness table, which is really helpful.
Yes.
You put a little bit more context around it in what you were just saying. I was trying to get my head around, is this factoring in the worst case scenario over the next 3 months? If we're doing what we said we would do to try and mitigate, or is it actually an assessment of how good those mitigations might be?
Yeah, no, and I welcome the comments on it, because it's difficult to actually pitch this right, because you could look at it from a number of lenses. But no, I think it's a good conversation to have. So look, this is the best way I can describe it. The scorecard is where we are against the constitutional standards. The graphs are where we are against our improvement trajectories. Okay. This table is, I suppose, my assessment as to whether we're going to meet the improvement trajectories. Okay. It's giving you a bit of an honest view of where it's actually at in the month that's reported, and my level of confidence that the mitigations attached to it will deliver.
Really helpful.
So I would treat it as not an opinion, but an informed opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. And may I ask one other question, which is about stroke care?
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of red there, and it's making me very anxious. Real drop off in thrombolysis rate, thrombolysis under an hour. I just wondered, do we know what's going on there?
Yeah, no, that's again a good question, because it's become a front and centre conversation of the conversations we're having at divisional performance reviews with Tim and Steve supporting. So that last discussion was yesterday morning in terms of that. The first thing to say about the thrombolysis one is it's very low numbers, very important, very important delivery, but very low numbers. So you're talking about 6-8 patients per, So by one patient moving 1 minute outside the hour, you could be dropping by 20% in terms of that. But that's an aside to the fact that we'd like everybody to get it.
Given it's no numbers, we should be delivering 100%.
Well, if it's low numbers, we should. I know, as you will well know, that the challenge in stroke is not always the number of strokes, it's the number of mimics. And therefore the mimics are huge in number by comparison to those strokes, and by comparison to those strokes that require thrombolysis or right thrombolysis. So it's getting to those patients in terms of that.
Okay. So what's happening in A&E, ED, MAU?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you look at ambulance data, for example, their stroke data shows huge volumes of strokes, inverted commas, coming into hospital. But they will work on a presentation symptom that could be anything from a tingling hand to a loss of power. Yeah. So in terms of that, so by the time that filters through to those patients who are actually going to need thrombolysis, there's a lot of work to go through to get to those patients in that sense. That said, the impact of thrombolysis within an hour is not something we'd like to do. It's an evidence-based pathway. So we really do need to get to those patients. So Tim had quite frank discussions with the the division yesterday about how we prioritise this and get some more real-time data about how we're doing yesterday and today, as opposed to how we did last week. So I think my sense of it would be that the team very much see this. They're very much onto it. They do realise now that it's something that we'll be talking about every 4 weeks in their performance reviews, and we'll track it forward going that way. But it is a really important measure.
Mine's on strike.
Okay. Are there any further questions on this element? Okay, let's move on then, please, to safety and effectiveness. Steve and Tim, is there anything specific you would want to draw attention for? I'm pretty sure we'll have questions on it. But...
Only 3 points, if I may, Chair. One is, if we look at the PQSM, the perinatal quality surveillance tool, the prompt training and fetal wellbeing training is now restored to a significantly more acceptable level. There's about 3% to go on each of those. The indicators at the bottom of the chart, it starts from a very, very low base. That's now improved significantly, which is good, good all round. And then just the other point is just to highlight some observation we have around falls, particularly falls with harm. It interestingly connects with the conversation we had at the start, Chair, with healthcare assistants. There is increasing evidence that the issue we have with healthcare assistants and having hands-on or eyes-on patients means that there's a propensity for patients to fall. Falling is okay as part of a positive risk-taking opportunity, but actually when it causes harm, it's a problem. So we do have a Falls Academy in the organisation, which has spent some time looking at both the instance of fall and where people are falling, the time of day that people are falling, and have a number of interventions in place, but we'll continue to observe this fairly closely. We've had 1 month change in data, so it's just 1 month, but it's nonetheless concerned.
Okay.
So those 3 points.
Tim?
And for me, just again, 3 points. The board will be familiar with the conversation we've had previously, especially John and Sarah in Quality Committee, about C. diff infection.
Yeah.
We're now back to just below our natural trajectory for that. It's difficult to explain exactly how we've managed to turn this around, the position around. It might just be the natural history of C. difficile in the southwest, but it's just to note we are back on to an acceptable trajectory.
Of interest, is that pattern shared by other hospitals? Because we've
No. So we've done something different. We are better than other regional colleagues in that regard.
That is interesting, given all the discussions we've had in the last 9 months.
But more work. It's clearly there's a whole PhD thesis for somebody in this willing to take it on. I'd like to comment as always about BT risk assessment. So those of you who anticipated we would have turned that around by now, I'm afraid we have not. In fact, it's difficult to give you a objective measure of VT risk assessment completion as we work through a fixed between our Careflow system and our recording and reporting systems, which is an ongoing piece of work. And as a consequence, I've asked for manual spot check audits across each division, which they are providing for me regularly, reporting a mean of 97% risk assessment. So that is reassuring, although clearly not an acceptable way forward in the medium term. And as I always do in this report, I assure the board that the hospital remains in the upper quartile in terms of its SHIMI, hospital mortality indicator. We are just in the upper quartile, and we to remain so. We've deteriorated a little bit, and I think some of that needs a little bit of a deep dive as to understand why we've just moved right, we've had a little right shift in our score there, but it's only been minor, so it's reassuring.
Questions for Steve or Tim?
We should point out that, of course, the COVID scorecard is somewhat out of date. and how things have shifted within 2 weeks is quite phenomenal.
Sandra,
Thanks for the info. Tim, you can imagine what my question's going to be. It's having the audits in place for the VTE is obviously great for giving us some assurance, but we've still got this ongoing problem that the WHO checklist is in as well now, that the data isn't being captured correctly. When do we feel we're going to actually start to get this data captured correctly?
The VT specifically, Sandra, so I'm informed that I want to use the right word, where's Neil, a patch is being created to help us port the data from Careflow into our IPR, and I hope that's available by the next board in a month's time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
I mean, it's fair to say, isn't it, that on both the WHO checklist and indeed VTE risk assessment, you can only go so many months claiming it to be a data collection problem. And I suspect we're running to the end of that road. So, you know, as a board, I think the next time we have this conversation, Tim, we need to be not blaming a data collection problem. So we either need to have assurance that we're doing better, or we need to have an action plan to do better. Because I think, you know, this must be many months we've been, actually, it's been a data collection problem.
Yeah, the VT, are we, just to clarify the concern over the WHO checklist?
Well, I still have the scars.
Hello.
The CQC demanding to know how, as the chair of this organisation, I could be prepared to have a WHO compliance at that point that was 99%. You know, and we've had, and I had the debate with your predecessor endlessly about this. But at the end of the day, it's going down. You know, we're now down to 98. Whatever the reason is, I need to be able to answer that question the next time.
Yeah, so I think we talked before about whether we rebase our baseline to 100%, and you know, that's, I accept your.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just make one more comment? Sorry, Chair, is that okay? My concern, Tim, as I say, we've got another month, but my concern is we knew we were changing the data capture system. We knew we got a new system coming in, and we already had a problem capturing the data before. So it's looking for the assurance that we're not just exacerbating it with a new system in there.
I can't comment on the technical aspects of the patch or the fix, but I'm told it will be simpler than previous data collection. So it'll be possible on Careflow with our current iPads and systems on the ward for it to be a one-click solution.
Can I just provide a little bit of clarification? So on the WHO checklist measure, that's simply the variation in the way that the data is recorded. We report accurately where it's recorded electronically into the theatre management system.
Okay.
And some surgeons operate outside of that process and record it in the paper record. In terms of the VT assessment, the data capture is much simpler, but we do have a challenge with our supplier currently in getting the data across from the system that it's been input to into the reporting system.
Okay.
So currently we're unable to know exactly whether we've got further issues in data capture because we can't fully provide the reports.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're doing it, we just can't capture the fact we're doing it.
What we're saying is we're doing both, and we can't report on the VTE one properly to know whether we've reduced our capturing until we get that report fixed at the end of the patch is due at the end of October.
Okay. So what I think you're hearing is that to be assured as a board, we need to see the data collection properly reflecting what we're actually doing in practice, and don't much mind how we get to that. Yeah, otherwise we constantly have a mismatch making an explanation for, but quite reasonably could be open to challenge. Because every month we're going, oh, well, it's because we can't capture the data. Sarah.
Yeah, I agree. And Sandra and I had a very good session with one of Neil's colleagues yesterday. We went through the new electronic patient record. That was good. Great to see, but I am a bit concerned that some surgeons are not recording stuff and they're writing things down. I know there are some things they need to write down, but are they choosing not to use the new approach? Well, I'll leave that to the executive team to go and investigate. Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
Well, judging by the amount of paper in urology at Western. Writing lots.
Neil, is this an education process they used to happen?
I think it's the work, pick my word carefully, but probably compliance challenge that you know, I think the belief in the organisation is that all of these checklists are being recorded, and the vast majority are being recorded as we have designed the process, and some are not.
Well, that's simple, isn't it? If we have people who are not complying with what's asked of them as part of their jobs, Tim, they work for your bit of the business. That's a conversation, isn't it?
It is a conversation, and I think we might be talking about multiple things here.
Okay, all right.
There are multiple aspects to our digital transformation. That's recently whether we're looking at outcoming appointment scheduling in outpatients versus a whole team approach. So VT risk assessments are done by registered and non-registered nursing colleagues. But I accept we have got pockets of the organisation who have failed to engage with new EPI processes, who they are.
Okay. Well, it's non-negotiable. Okay. Let's move on then, if we may, to patient experience. Steve?
Yeah, just two comments, Chair. One is just to note the slight rise in formal complaints that we received in August. Again, just one data point, but keeping an eye on why that would be. And then just something about the responsiveness rate of the complaint responses. I guess if I take the same challenge, Chair, for Tim, we sit here and look at poor performance for a number of months. So we do address that through the divisional performance reviews each month, but I'm nonetheless committed to coming back with a plan that improves our performance as we go into the autumn and winter. So yeah, nothing else to add. Happy to take questions.
Okay. Questions? Okay, well led, Jackie. Anything you want to pull out?
I think really the headline is that we're just about holding our own in the most unprecedented and difficult times. So if you actually look at the top level trust stats, we decreased our vacancy and our turnover very, very slightly in August. But actually, if you look underneath that data, we actually took on 60 more whole-time equivalents. We filled an awful lot of vacancies. And we've also got the junior doctor turnaround, you know, in August. And I think when I start actually looking at that data for specialty, and so we have more dental and medical appointments, which is great. However, in terms of the turnover, we are losing a huge amount of people at band 2 and 3 HCAs, which is quite an interesting correlation to your own observation. And when I actually triangulate that in some areas in medicine and one or two of the specialties, that's at 40%. So I think my HR team describe it as pouring people into a leaky bucket. So as fast as we're recruiting, and we need to increase, you know, we've got things like level 6 and all these new things that we're recruiting to as well. The turnover is massive. We're not an outlier, which is sort of slightly more worrying in a way. This is what's happening across the NHS. And you know, we took the paper at the last board about managing staff. We're putting all of the well-being, financial, psychological, physical support factors in place, from, you know, subsidised food to free car parking, so we're putting all of that in. We're trying to make recruitment much faster and quicker, and we've got an end-to-end project to look at that. We're working with having a fast track and having a prioritised recruitment. This was simply the systems that we used to have go, where you just recruited people in and they wait in the queue, and no longer fit for our purpose. We have to have some sort of fast track, and we have to put some resources in. Sick levels again are sort of are high, but they're fine. We haven't got an awful lot of long-term sick. We, the SAD continues to be the major stress, anxiety, and depression seems to be one of the major factors, but actually that's showing an increase, and we're now beginning to see a very current little spike.
Thank you. It was an interesting observation, just to go back to my visit yesterday, because I did talk to the sister and the nursing team about, we're all part of a national framework around pay. So that's really quite difficult. What else would make you want to stay, And they did talk about many of those things like parking, like not necessarily having to do a 12-hour shift, that actually if we could offer 8-hour shifts, quite a number of nurses who would come in and do an 8-hour shift and would feel better about that. And so there were a lot of that conversation with some of the things we talked about at the last board about being a different sort of employer.
Yeah.
And that would encourage people to stay with us who might not in other circumstances. So, heavens, we are going to have to be so flexible.
And Steve, our chief nursing officer, held a safe staffing summit last week with all the senior nurses. And, I won't speak for you, Steve, but, that underpinned and that sort of flexibility plus all the hygiene factors, from accommodation in Bristol continues and increasingly becomes a really difficult piece. And I mean, we're working very closely together, and I think the flexibility that we're now beginning to offer, particularly for nursing colleagues, is unprecedented in our history, and I'm really hoping that's going to be very supportive.
Shorter shifts are coming, Chair.
Sorry?
Shorter shifts are coming.
Shorter shifts. And it's this business of if they want to work a day a week, why would we not accommodate that? We would if they worked in the bank, wouldn't we? And we would if they worked for an agency, they'd work a day a week.
To my surprise, Chair, a few weeks ago, the safe staffing summit, I realised that it's not an HR policy, it's a nursing policy, that we would only accept people if they could do 23 hours a week. I don't know why we have. Well, so I said why, then we said no more.
Yeah, because we wouldn't apply that to the bank.
You can do a shift a month, quite frankly. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay, Tim.
You can stay current, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a cleverness about that, isn't there? That they work on the same ward. So if they're doing their day a month, they do that in a place where they're familiar.
And actually, we pay them now to stay current, because that's how much we need them.
I was going to ask about agency. We're obviously very highly dependent on agency staff at the moment. Financially, we probably have not much choice because there isn't anywhere else to build. But I suppose are the agency still available? Do you feel that what are the implications go into the winter and there become more challenges regarding sickness and everything else? Have we got somewhere to go, or is this going to lead to significant operational challenges as we potentially run out of agency staff?
Yeah, so you'll know that we've got a trust level target and a national target and a system target to reduce agency spend. And you can see, particularly with RMNs, we're beginning to slowly do that. The availability of agency is indeed a critical issue. We've now brought another agency in through Steve, and we're not always getting the fill. But part of this is reconfiguring our workforce to do things differently. We need our HCAs to be perhaps doing some of the work that we're getting those RMNs and then perhaps then need some cleaners and porters to be doing some of the stuff. So a lot of this is about reconfiguring how we do our work as well. But is it a risk going into winter? The answer is yes, but it's absolutely critical that we reduce our agency spend. And we've got somebody coming directly to work for the chief nursing officer from next week. And their whole remit is to look at how we can reconfigure to reduce that agency spend.
Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd still be quite interested in understanding how these 750 vacancies do split over the workforce categories. But just observations really from the other organisations I'm involved in, and you know, they're all facing the same problems of 20% plus churn. Some are able to pay one-off bonuses, which they're now doing to, or they say they're going to do at the end of the year, to recognise the cost of living pressures. A lot are basically saying we can't actually recruit because the people aren't there, so they're having to rethink the jobs that we have and not just recruiting to a profile, because we've got to do something different.
Yes.
So I think trying to do that each time we look at recruitment of a post has got to happen, because we just can't recruit the number of people we need. So.
And you know, when we're starting to look at the end to end, and as execs, we have that level of data. We did our first deep dive into it yesterday afternoon. We're having a 25% dropout on the day of interview because someone's already we've been gazumped, if you like, either where they're currently working. We know that people are leaving the health economy altogether. We know there's high employment, so there's a thing. So, and from point of interview and offer to them joining, we're losing about 25-30% of people because they can simply start tomorrow with Amazon for a much higher wage. So that's the market we're in. And of course, we are within the bounds of a national agenda for change framework, whereas everything that we do has to fall within that framework or has to be negotiated. So it's quite hard to actually be supported in that environment.
So we just have to try and rethink what people do, because I think that's the crux of it, to be honest.
Can I ask about the process? It's one of the things that I'm involved in as well in recruitment. I can't recruit anybody in the place I'm working at the moment. Very difficult. But we're also having to rethink about the pre-employment checks, because actually we're losing so many people between the offer and the arrival, because the pre-employment checks and all of the various processes take so long. So I'm starting to sign exemptions. Now I'm in a different environment, but nevertheless dealing with the public in quite sensitive areas. But how much flexibility can we show in the way that we bring people in under supervision and so on?
Yeah, exactly that. And we know that's exactly. So our sort of mean is 28 days from offer to joining. And the worst is sort of about 35, 36, and it's about DBS checks. We can't make those go any faster. We can't pay. So we're now having a risk-based approach. We need to take a risk as a trust, but we need to understand what that risk is about bringing people in who are not working in, sort of isolated roles, unsupervised roles, subject to a reference, a DBS check, and then offering them the full thing. So we're going to have to be pleased foot that we have you do your test on your basic English and maths test online. You get your ticket. You come to our bulk recruitment. You don't have to fill in forms. You have, you do your document check. You have your interview. You have your offer. You start the following week, subject to, and then we do that. That's where we're going. But it has to be. There will be a risk that we have to look at. Have to take a risk.
Yeah, and also addressing how do we become more attractive when we're bound by agenda for change. We're looking at how we can potentially say, well, we will pay people who are successful. We'll pay for you to come to interview. We'll pay for you to do your training, or for when you come along to bring your documents, etc. We will pay for those. So when you join on day one, you've got 4 days of pay. To create that, or actually incent me to go there.
One of the critical factors will be getting those people online and paying for them to do their Statman training before they arrive.
Just one quick question from me. We're not doing that well on appraisals, are we?
No.
That's not a question, that's a statement.
No,
sorry.
No, that's right. So this is a planned, a known deviation from our normal annual thing, and it's about the introduction of electronic patient record and the fact that many staff had to do a lot of mandated training to do that. So we agreed that this year, exceptionally, that they would, but however, and through our departmental monthly reviews, which we've just finished this month's round of, each area has got a plan. However, when you look at our turnover figure, there has to be a correlation between me not having an appraisal and a turnover.